Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Well, thank you for welcoming me so kindly again. So we are back into our 13 segments of rethinking, reworking, reconceptualizing, learning, teaching, the role of the institution in this, in particular in higher education, but from there we can make all kinds of conclusions also for high school, middle school, even elementary school learning. So what is learning that is at the core of the 13 segments? So here are the first 7 segments that I introduced briefly, and then the next 6 segments that I introduced briefly last time. And so last week I went in more detail through the first 3 segments. All right? The first 3 segments, a brief introduction and overview, introduction to myself, who am I, why do I think this is an important, interesting topic, and why there is also a connection between what I'm usually teaching and what I'm doing now, and that I wanted to bring to bear the things that I learned, in particular here in Guangzhou at Guangzhou over the last 2 years. So I wanted to bring this back to the community here and show a little bit of what I've been doing. So that's what I did in 10-15 minutes last week. Then I turned to the topic of learning and teaching. And already at that point, the emphasis was on learning, less on teaching. And we will get back there. Because we usually think of it's all the teaching that matters, that is important. But if we rethink it and look at it from the learner's point of view, not from the teacher's point of view, we may come to different conclusions. And that's what we started out by looking at 3 of my heroes, Sir Ken Robinson, and today I will show a brief clip of his TED lecture, of one of his TED lectures. Then I referred to Keith Sawyer, and then to Nancy Budwick. And in the order, it was Ken Robinson who criticizes all learning. He argues that there is something deeply at fault, wrong, with schools these days and with schooling these days. And not just in the United States or Europe. He argues that this is a universal trend. So we went a little bit into that. Then Keith Sawyer coming up with a little bit of an alternative, trying to argue that there should be something that brings this problem to an end, and that is called deep learning. We'll get back to that in a little bit today as well. And then Nancy Budwick, who approaches the same kinds of issues by suggesting a number of objectives that the institution, learning institutions, have to embrace, teachers have to become more aware of, and students will embrace them in their classroom and outside their classroom. So that's what we did last week. Now let's turn to the new segment, 2 segments today. One on identities of students. I start with that topic, teachers and institutions. And the second is, what about if we change the focus from the notion of what we teach, the content, to how we teach? So that will be the second focus, the second segment today. So let's start with the first one. So this is the 4th segment in the series of 13. Done with the first 3. And this one is focusing on the identity of students as learners, of teachers as teachers, and also the role of the institution. So let me go through this in more detail. But first, why identity? Why do I conceptualize or want to reconceptualize the whole issue in terms of the players, students, teachers, institutions, in terms of identities? Identity is typically the question of how people make sense of themselves. People, but also institutions. How they put themselves into a particular light, how they view themselves. This also has to do nowadays a lot with branding products, how we think who we are and how we put ourselves on the market with our portfolios. In case you need to apply for a job, you do this by putting a bio and a couple of recommendation letters together, and this is a kind of a sense of who you are for, hopefully, your future employer. So that is what identity is. And here, I'm particularly interested in how students nowadays make sense of themselves in their role of being in college, being in a university. What kind of idea of who they are and what their role in this institution is, that is the focus of student identity. Then we'll turn to the teacher. What is their role in the institution these days? And then we turn to the institution of how do educational institutions make sense of their role, in particular then when it comes to a reconceptualization of learning and teaching. Okay? So let's have first a brief look at identity before we turn to the more details. There are three dimensions, I call them, in which people conceptualize, talk about themselves. First of all, there's a way of distinguishing ourselves from others. In that dimension, we emphasize similarities and differences. So in a way, we differentiate ourselves. Like sometimes you, as a group who live together with your roommates, you differentiate yourself from the roommates from a different block, or that the linguistic students differentiate themselves from the literature and film students. But sometimes we bring other categories into play, like race or ethnicity or nationality, because those are typical differences that we draw on in particular situations. In other situations, we don't. We are considering ourselves as more or less the same, across these so-called differences. Okay, so this is where we, in particular when we talk about ourselves or others, we affiliate, we align ourselves, or we differentiate ourselves from others. And this is sometimes nicely navigated, and out comes a particular sense of who I am as different but same. Okay? So this is the first dimension. The second dimension is the one that I called agency. And this is pretty much, I am the product of my parents, of my upbringing, my socialization. The world I live in, the world has made me, the world is making me. And as I mentioned before, I am here right now also because I want to bring back what I learned in the last 2 years at Guangzhou. How much of the impact that my being here, of you, so to speak, had on me, on my new identity. And you see already in this way to conceptualize identity this way, identity is something that is more of a process, that is changing. It's not anything that is constant, that you are born with as traits, or personality characteristics. But when I say that I'm made by the world that I live in, we also have an impact on the world that we are living in, right? I mean, we have hopefully a positive impact on our roommates. We have also a positive impact on our parents or our children, on others, in particular, teaching on our students, hopefully a positive impact. So we are also in the process of world making, so to speak. So we are a product of the world and we are making. So what comes into the play here with regard to agency is that sometimes we consider ourselves as highly agentive, as heroes, as world changers. But at other times, we are more the recipient of other people's actions. And this is typically where we if we want to put ourselves into these categories of an undergoer, of a victim. Yeah, in particular, when you want to talk about yourself as suffering, the poor student who is suffering by too much work that the professors give you. Yeah, then you put yourself into the position of the undergoer, low agency, no agency. The agency is in the institution or in the teacher. Does that make sense? Yeah. And the third dimension is the one of change, is the one where we draw on sometimes, I have changed. I have become smarter over my life. I have become more mature. I don't make the same mistakes that I made in particular when I was a child or an adolescent. Yeah. So this is the way of sometimes positive change. But it could also be a negative change, yeah, where we did something that, not us, but that helped us to end up in jail or in some bad situation. So, but we can contrast this as a positive or negative change, but we can also contrast this to same. Yeah. Some people say, no, I haven't changed much. I'm exactly the same person as 5 years. Yeah, I maybe here or there, but I'm the same person. So again, the navigation of, am I the same as I was when I was a little boy, as an adolescent, in my 20s, to now? I am the same to some degree, but I'm also changing. Okay? So these are the three identity dimensions that I will try to bring a little bit to bear when we'll talk about starting with students. So, students, do they want to be in school? I'm not talking about you. Typically, when you talk to children, how is school? What do you typically get back? A complaint. Too much work, boring, I hate my so-and-so teacher, but that one teacher, that is nice. She likes me. Yeah, something like this. But it is typically a more negative orientation to being in school. So it is associated, I put this up here, with labor, with stress. School is stressful. It is also something where you can't really do what you would like to do, typically. Yeah, the teacher will call on you if you are bringing alcohol to the classroom. Just a bad joke. But you can't do certain things that you can do, however, out of the classroom, outside of school. So there is this dimension, this shift of outside of classroom, outside of school, we can be who we want to be. We are more of our authentic self. Inside the classroom, we are a student. We have to perform a particular role, and most of the times this role is connected to more negative than positive attributes. Outside of school, we can be playful. We can be joyful. We can be creative. We can do stuff that we typically can't do in the classroom. Yeah, we are more self-directed. We are more ourselves outside of the classroom, outside of school. When we are with our friends, when we are with family, when we are with our lovers, yeah, this is where we feel more comfortable than in school, where we have to sit, where we are forced into particular roles, where we have, sometimes we consider this even, put a particular mask on. Yeah, a mask as something that is not really me, but it is being a good student. Yeah, so we are doing being a good student. And in addition, we consider it also as a transitional identity, as something that leads us, hopefully, to something better. And I put up here, when we get out of school, at least American students, then they consider themselves finally as adult. They are already 18 to 22 years old. They are adults. They can vote. They can be drawn for or pulled into service. So there are definitely adult features. They are not allowed in the United States to drink. That's by the age of 21, as you may know. But they are adult, but they consider themselves after college as full adults. This is when they hope to become employed. This is also where some of them hope to become rich. This is where some of them hope to have family, children. This is where they are looking forward to be happy. School, not so happy. After school, after college, after university, this is where life is self-fulfilling and happy. So these are the kinds of considerations that we get when we look at students' identities. Let's look briefly at teachers' identity. So do teachers want to be in school? We should ask them. Yeah, we should ask them. Well, but what we typically can see also is a prolonging of the same kind of split that students have, that teachers say, at school, when I teach, I have to work. And work is labor. It's not always rewarding. I get to some positive aspects of teaching in a second. Yeah, but teaching is also connected with stress, preparing, doing my job well. So there is this split between a personal identity that teachers have outside the classroom, where you can sit with them and eat and drink and have fun and joke. But in the classroom, inside school, the teacher typically has a different role, is placing themselves also in a more distant role to students. Okay, teachers typically are not students' friends. They don't converse with students at a more private or personal level. So this is something that teachers realize very quickly, and they also realize that life is not as nice as they thought it would when they were students, where they thought everything is great after I'm graduated, my life is happy, self-fulfillment will come. No, it's not quite like that. Yeah, there are other troubles ahead. So life continues, and it's not the kind of fulfillment and happiness that everybody thought they would reach after graduation. Okay, so this split is one that prolongs, that goes on, right, between a professional identity and the identity that I have at home, where I can do things, where I can be more playful, where I can joke very differently than in the classroom, etc. So in addition, teachers are also torn between the institutional demands. There's a curriculum that teachers typically have to fulfill. But on the other hand, they are also the students that teachers hopefully, typically care for. And I am trying to use this distinction between serving the school, as the institution, and caring. Now, caring is a term that Carol Gilligan used, and she used it much more for girls, for women who are more in the caring profession than men who are more in the justice profession, in the serving profession. I'm borrowing that a little bit here, but maybe this is an interesting parallel, because the teaching profession internationally is done more and more is by women than by males. Why is that so? Okay, that's not our question here. But there is this split again, this being torn. On the one hand, I have to serve the university. On the other, I have to serve in a way to care for my students. Listen to what is it that they want, what is it that they desire, what they hope for in class and also outside of class. So there are the students' expectations that pull in one direction, and the institution's directions necessarily don't pull in the same direction. So in addition also, in particular in higher education, the split also is between being a teacher, being a researcher, and being somebody who is doing service, a colleague in the institution. And in most of the countries that I've been teaching so far, university teachers are evaluated on all of these three dimensions. Are they a good teacher? Do they get good course evaluations? Are they good researchers? Are they nationally or internationally acknowledged? And also, do they do a job within the institution? Yeah, do they help their colleagues? Do they sometimes take over administrative jobs? Very important. So these are three dimensions, again, that pull teachers in different directions. Okay. So let me turn briefly to the institutions. How do institutions figure into this larger picture of learning, teaching, and education? Institutions nowadays are more and more competing, partly because they have to make money to sustain, not necessarily in every nation, because in a lot of European and Asian nations, education is public. But if it is private, as in the United States to a large degree, those institutions have to fight for their survival. And in order to do this, they have to get a good sense of what is the market asking for. So this is where institutions in education become more and more governed by market constraints. What is the demand for education, in particular also higher education, and what can institutions offer? And this is where institutions try to differentiate themselves from other institutions, like this type of university as a foreign studies university, who is also training teachers, as different from normal universities. Where, to the best of my knowledge, and I hope I'm not stepping on anyone's toes, normal universities teachers have an easier job, have an easier way to get a job as a teacher than students that are coming out of foreign studies universities. However, foreign studies universities may have to offer something else that needs to be more marketed and better branded, so that institutions of education, tertiary education, high school and middle schools are realizing that foreign studies universities possibly have more to offer than normal university graduates. So you see a little bit of how these institutions are in the business of differentiating themselves, but also now aligning themselves and affiliating themselves with other institutions. Okay, so this is something where this identity or the identities of these institutions need to be navigated, need to be strategized. And this is done by people higher up in institutions who are thinking about what do we have in terms of what is our teaching potential? What do we have in terms of the students who are coming thus far into these different institutions, building on that, but not leaving it there and just sailing the same road, but trying to influence it, trying to market it, to strategize it in ways so that the institution can go up higher in the competitive network within which institutions are competing with one another. This is where institutions also are obliged to come across as authentic, because if Guangzhou was advertising itself in ways that are not authentic, then people will argue that doesn't make any sense. That's not who they used to be, and this is not who they are now. So an advertising strategy that is promising too much will not be successful. So you see how institutions are in the business also of managing who they are, their identity, their way of being perceived, and giving other institutions something to compare. So what I've done so far is I've talked a little bit about how students make sense of themselves, how teachers make sense of themselves, and how institutions are also in the business of making sense of themselves. Now, how can we get these three, the way I just characterized, where students, let me put it bluntly, don't want to be in the classroom, don't want to be in college, don't want to be in school, where teachers also have a very broken identity with regard to being a teacher, being a server to the institution, being a colleague, being a researcher, juggling these different identities, and where the institution is in the business of branding itself as doing a good job, as bringing out students who can compete on the national and international market. So how can we bring these together and develop something in terms of new curricula, new identities, and the new objectives that I brought up last time in segment 3 as a ways of creating a broader, a deeper understanding in our students, more creativity, more ability to collaborate across differences with others, a way to speak up with authority, with ways of being acknowledged as a creative thinker, etc. So how can we do this? Yeah, where do we start? Do we start in the institution, top down, so that the institution says, we've got to do something here. Yeah, we have to do something different in order to market our students better in 5 years. Yeah, so this would be top down. How could this be done? Should this start in the classroom, where the teachers are bringing in new instruments, new ways, new learning? Or are there any other strategies? Should we make our students work harder? Consider that. More rigor. Raise the standards. Yeah, get something going at that level. Or the third one would, can we wait for student initiatives that our students will say, look, the institutions are not anymore doing their job well enough. They need to do better. They need to try harder. So these are the kinds of questions. And this is the end of segment 4. And with that, we have some time to ask questions, launch discussion points, raise objections,